Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a trophy head out of paper mache. I've already started by creating a base for the trophy head. I wanted it to be, or to look kind of like a log, so I made it thicker. I added about 4 layers of cardboard, and then later on I'm going to be adding a texture of paper clay along the edges of it to make it look kind of like bark. So this is going to be the base that my project sits on, and then I'm going to be creating this little uh, cat-like dragon sort of figure to start with. I haven't quite thought of a name for her yet, but we'll get there eventually. So to get started, we're going to start crumpling up newspaper. There are a few tips for creating things with newspaper. The first is that you want it to be crumpled as tightly as you can so that your sculpture is very sturdy. One thing that really doesn't work is if you take your newspaper and just roll it up like this, say if you're making legs or a neck or something. Just doing this and making a roll is not going to help you because this is weak. It's not going to hold any weight. It's going to be very fragile and breakable. So what we do want to do is crumple up the paper very tightly and tape it very tightly. And that's how we're going to get started. So I'm going to start by creating the head of my creature just to get myself sort of a size reference. Obviously, because I have this base for the trophy head, I need to know, like, the head is going to be about this big in comparison to the base. We don't want it any bigger than that, otherwise it's going to look unbalanced. So let's get started by crumpling up that paper. As you may have noticed, I crumpled up the pieces of newspaper individually, so each sheet I crumpled up. If I tried to crumple up an entire section of the news, it's not going to be as tight and you're not going to have as strong of a base to work with. Then what I had also done was take the smaller piece and then slowly start to wrap the newspaper around it by kind of sort of crumpling around it. And once I get it to a vague sort of shape that I want, I think this is roughly about the size of the head that I'm looking for, I'm going to start taping it. A good rule of thumb is to kind of make a long strip of tape and hang it off the side of your table. I'm going to hang it on my camera stand because that's closer to my head right now. So pardon the wobbles. So you can see here that I have kind of wrapped the newspaper around the front of this, giving it a smoother edge to work with. This is going to make your life easier when you are paper macheing because it's already smooth, so you don't have to tape it as much. The back side, however, is a lot more crumply, so we're going to need to tape that pretty well. Some tips about taping: always make sure your tape is doing a job. Don't just stick it on there and expect it to, magically hold everything. You need to be precise in the way you place it so that the tape is holding down exactly what you want it to be doing. Otherwise, you're just going to end up wasting a lot of tape because it's not holding anything in place. That's why it's helpful to have this smooth side, because you always have something for your tape to grab onto. So as you can see, I didn't really use a ton of tape here. I didn't need to because my tape was doing a job. So saving tape is always helpful. That way you aren't just cruising through all your materials and running out while you're midway through a project. Alright, so now I've got a relatively head-shaped piece. I can always start to add on pieces as I go to make it into the shape that I really want it to be, but this is a good start. So what I'm going to do next is start making the neck that attaches. I'll start adding all the details to the body once I have it attached to this board. So same principle with the neck. You want to crumple up individual sheets of paper and then add them together. We don't roll the paper, otherwise it wouldn't hold the weight of the head. And then we're always going to be using the base and the head as a guide for our proportions. So we don't want to have the neck super huge because that would look goofy with a tiny little head, and we also don't want it too small. So by comparing the sizes between the head and the base, it's going to help us kind of figure out what size we need to make it. So let's get started with that. So you can see how I'm kind of squeezing this to make sure that the interior is actually packed really tightly. So there is still a little squish to it, so I'm going to start adding more newspaper around it, but for right now I'm just kind of taping it down to keep it tight. Now the next good tip is when I attach the head, I'm leaving this extra newspaper on the top, and this is going to make it a lot easier for me to tape the head onto the neck. If it were all closed up like this, and this is also all closed up, they're not going to have an easy spot to fit. So by leaving this open, it almost creates sort of like a nest that I can set my sculpture into. So first I need to figure out what direction it's going. So I think I'm going to set it on like this. And so I'm just going to kind of arrange this to make sure it sits right. And then I'll just wrap the paper around it and hold it tightly while I tape it then. Sometimes it's helpful to have a friend or someone hold on to stuff for you while you tape it. It'll usually make your life a little easier because then you can use both your hands, especially if you run out of tape. One thing that a lot of people tend to forget is taping the underside of things. So don't forget to attach at the underside, otherwise you're going to have a really floppy head. I think I'm going to kind of build on the neck shape a little bit because I want a little more of a curve. So I'm starting to get a curve right here, but I'd like to have it kind of curving in the other direction here and have a little more definition along the side of the head. So I'm going to start adding on pieces to kind of adjust that, and then we'll attach it to the base. So just like what I did with the head, I'm kind of trying to leave a smooth edge, and I'm kind of stuffing the paper into the interior to make it a little easier to paint or to tape, and make it a little easier to keep it lump free, if you will. So I've got a hot glue gun on right now, and I'm just going to attach this to the base. You don't have to glue your stuff on. If you tape it well, it should be fine, but sometimes if your stuff is a little top heavy, a little extra glue might be beneficial for you. I'm just going to press that down, hold it into place for a little bit, and then I'm going to tape it onto the base. Now once we have this kind of tape down in this fashion, going up and down, I want to take some tape and go across these connection points, and that's going to just give it a little bit of added stability, in addition to kind of help smoothing the tape down to give you a clean edge around your creature. And then I'm still going to need to tape around this top part to help secure everything. So we'll kind of work in the same fashion, so going up and down and then across to help everything stay in place. Alright, now I think I have the shape that I want for my animal, and now I think it's time to start adding details. So we've got ears, we've got a snout, we've got little horns, and some little spikes down the back, so let's get started with those. The most important part whenever you're making two of something is to make them at the same time before you attach them. That way you can make sure that what you are making is the same size and the same shape before you attach it, which saves a lot of tape, and it saves a lot of time, and it saves a lot of grumbles later on if you attach something and it's not the right size. So this goes for arms, legs, horns, ears. Right now I'm going to be making the snout, so there's two of those on either side. Eyes, pretty much everything that has more than one of the same thing. So always make them first all together, check the size of the first one to make sure it's what you want, and then make the rest all the same size. So starting by using the same amount of paper is going to help, or wire, or whatever materials you're using. Always make sure it's the same size. That way you're going to roughly get the same shape. The key thing when I'm adding pieces like this is I don't want to smooth them all down. I want to have some sort of overlapping shapes that help me show what it is I am making. So I'm going to try and create a fold, so to speak, around where the mouth is going to go. And I think that's going to help kind of make everything look the way it's supposed to. So I want it to kind of overlap near the mouth area, but then I want it to smooth up as I work onto the sides of the head. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Check it from multiple angles to make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. So that's the thing about sculpture, is we work in the round, meaning you need to look at it from every direction, because if it only looks good from one direction, then what's the point of even having a three-dimensional sculpture? The whole point is that we should be able to walk around it and view it from different angles, and it should look good from all of those angles. Alright, now I'm going to make kind of the bridge of the nose area. Alright, I'm going to add the eyes after I paper mache because I'm going to use some doll making eyes so they actually look kind of realistic. And then I'm going to be using some paper clay, which is kind of an air dry clay that you make out of toilet paper and glue and a bunch of random materials. So I'll be making a little more details and kind of smoothing all this out with the paper clay as I go along. So now I've got kind of a snout and a nose made. I'm going to start adding on to the top of the head, making horns and ears. So the same principles apply. Make two at the same time and then attach them, making your life a lot easier. So when you make ears, depending on the thickness of them, you can always use wire and then wrap tape or paper around them. Otherwise, you can shape it just straight with the paper. It's up to you and your confidence with making things the way you want. I think I'm going to start just with paper first and see how it goes, and then if I need it, I'll add some wire. So when I make ears, I usually start by just folding the paper and making sort of triangular shapes. And remember, when you're attaching, keep that extra paper on the bottom to make it easier to attach things. So that feels like a good ear to me. I can tape and sculpt a little more later. So I think I'm going to add some wire onto this just so I can create the curves of the ears that I want. And just like anything, always take the same amount. I'm just kind of wrapping the newspaper around the wire inside of it to get the curves that I want. And once I have that, I can take little strips of newspaper or of tape and just kind of wrap it around to hold it in place. So here's a pretty cool ear. We'll check the size. I'm going to kind of flare out the newspaper. Make sure comes the right size when I attach the wires. Now I need to do the same thing on the other side, but going the other direction. So that's always the challenge when you're making two of something, is to make it move the same way. But I guess if his ears are slightly different, he might look a little disgruntled, which could be interesting. Alright, so I've got an awl here, and I'm going to use it to just poke a few holes where the ears are going to go. And I'll just kind of reshape the ear a little bit and just quickly tape it on. I'm not going to do the full-on tape job right away, just in case I need to move it. So there's one ear. Let's add on the second. So we'll check the ear placement from a few different angles. And last but not least, we have horns and spikes. So just like the ears, you have the option of using wire. You don't necessarily need to. And again, always make two at the same time rather than attaching one and then finding out the second one isn't the same size. Just like with the ears, when we attach these horns, you want to leave a little bit of extra paper off the ends of it, and that's going to make it easier to tape down because you'll have a little bit of stuff to spread out. I'm going to tear off a little bit of the excess just so I don't have so much. I don't want it to be too big. Alright, and then the last thing I'm going to make in this video is just some spikes going down the back. I'll probably just use some wire and poke them in and then tape over them, maybe add a little bit of newspaper for some volume. I'm going to give a little bit of extra wire on here so that I have a little space to poke holes and put them into the armature. So just like I did with the ears, I'm going to just use this first piece as a guide, and I will just cut a few of the exact same size to work with. I'm going to add just a dot of hot glue onto these holes just to give it a little extra stick. You don't want to overdo it. So right now I'm just wrapping tape right around these little spikes. It'll just make it easier to paper mache over them by having some material in between the spikes. You can paper mache straight wire, but it does get a little challenging sometimes. So just by putting a little bit of tape there just to fill it in, that generally helps out quite a bit. I'm making sure to fold over any bumps in the tape so that it is filling up that entire space. Another thing you can do is take a scissors and you can cut the tape around it, so you could just make two sides and then place the tape around it. It's really whatever makes you feel comfortable is going to work best for you. Alright, so here you have it. We have a basic armature created out of newspaper, tape, cardboard, and wire. The next video is going to cover how to use papier-mâché and paper clay. So stay tuned for the next installment.